Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third match in the quarterfinal round of the International Reparations Debate Competition for 2026. My name is Jermaine Barrett, and I'll be the chair adjudicator of this match. And we have been treated thus far to some fantastic matches. Even today, I mean, it's been some very close calls, a challenging process for us as adjudicators to arrive at the right calls. And it does speak to the excellence that this competition has unearthed and is curating. Now, we have two adjudicators with us who are distinguished in their own rights, and I'll allow them now to introduce themselves, beginning with Ms. Chantal Hughes.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chantal Hughes, serving as a wing adjudicator, and I'm sending best of luck to both teams, and I'm looking forward to a very exciting clash of ideas.
Right, Chantal Hughes, and coming to us all the way from the United Kingdom, we now welcome Javon Downey, another adjudicator. Go right ahead, Javon.
Good afternoon, guys. So, as Jermaine said, I'm Javan Downey, and I echo his sentiments in saying that the matches thus far have been exhilarating, and I am hoping for nothing other than same in this match. And best of luck to both teams.
Thank you so very, very much. All right. Now we have some partners and sponsors, and every single match I really extol the value that they bring to the competition by quite frankly allowing it to exist. And so I'm going to now invite Chantal Hughes to announce to us those sponsors so we can celebrate them and honor them. Go ahead, Chantal.
Thank you, Jermaine. Our partners do bring tremendous value to this competition. They're the ones making this initiative possible. We'd like to extend our thanks to the University of the West Indies, the Center for Reparation Research, UE Press, Jade Limited, University of Hull, and our main partners, the Repair Campaign.
Thank you very much, Chantal. All right. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it is time. It is that time where we get to meet the stars, the real stars of this event, the debaters. So we have from Montego Bay High School, they are coming to us, they will be proposing rather the motion, and I'll tell you a little later, Chantal will announce a little later what the motion is. But Montego Bay High School is in proposition. And on opposition, we have CV Bethel Senior High School, out of Bahamas. Of course, Montego Bay High School is out of Jamaica. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we now want to have the debaters introduce themselves. So, Montego Bay High School, your proposition, you may open your microphones and tell us who you are, your names, and let us hear your voices.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chantel Lawrence, and I will be the first speaker representing the Montego Bay High School.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Renee Shaw, and I am the second proposition speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Khadija Jennings, and I am the third speaker for the proposition.
Thank you very much, Montego Bay High School. Ladies and gentlemen, we move now to the opposition side to hear from CV Bethel Senior School. We invite them now to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Angel Perez, and I will be your first speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Jenna Monk, and I will be your second speaker.
Good afternoon. I'm Kenneth Wright, and I'll be your third speaker.
All right, thank you very much, CV Bethel. We're honored to have you in the competition. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, the rules now. Some of you would have heard these rules already, and so it's a refresher for some of you. And for others, this might be your first time, and so it helps to be acquainted with them even now. So the three speakers exist on each team. There are two teams, and each speaker will speak for a different amount of time. The first speaker will speak for 7 minutes, the second speaker on each team speaks for 6 minutes, the third and final speaker on each team speaks for 5 minutes. After the first two speakers' presentations, that's the Prime Minister and leader of the opposition will proceed rather to the first period of cross-examination. And we'll have another period of cross-examination after the second pair of speakers. Note that there are some rules regarding timings and so forth related to the cross-examinations, and I'll go through those at the appointed time. We'll then pause after the second period of cross-examination, pause for 1 minute ahead of the reply speeches. We'll hear the reply speaker from the opposition team first, followed by that from the proposition team. Proposition's third and reply speaker will conclude the debate overall. All right. So with those things in mind, and of course, the debaters are very much aware of their speaker times, but not just speaker times, the protected times within which they ought not to receive or be asked points of information. That applies to the first and second speaker on each team. The first and last minutes are protected. We're going to have Chantal Hughes doubling up as adjudicator and timekeeper because she'll be dropping in the chat the various signals to indicate that you know where you are in terms of the timing of your speech. All right. So I think we've gone through the important rules. Now it's time for us to hear the motion. So Chantal, what is the motion for this match?
Thank you, Jermaine. So the motion for this match reads, this House believes Caribbean states should meaningfully limit migration to former colonial powers. I repeat, this House believes Caribbean states should meaningfully limit migration to former colonial powers.
All right, thank you very much, Chantal. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for debate to begin. Let us now invite the first proposition speaker, that's the Prime Minister from Montego Bay High School for Girls, to open this debate. Here.
For timekeeping purposes, I will begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. I want you to imagine a small island nation, one like our very own. For decades, its government has taken its most precious resource, its tax revenue, its national wealth, to invest in the most valuable assets any country can possess, its children. It funds the textbooks they need to learn, the training for teachers, the very desk they sit at to receive the fruit of their government's labor. It pays for doctors, engineers, and scientists with hopes that one day these brilliant minds will build the nation's infrastructure, staff its hospital, and teach its next generation. And just as they are ready to give back, at the moment of their graduation, the beginning of their success, a foreign power, a former colonial metropole extends an offer, a job, a visa, a brand new life. And with that offer, the small island nation watches as its investment, its future, its very lifeblood, board a plane to the United Kingdom or even Canada, taking this investment with them, leaving behind only a bill. This is not an act of nature. It is not just migration. This is a policy choice. And this House firmly believes that Caribbean states must have the courage and sovereign authority to end it. And it is this very reason why we stand here today in firm agreement with the mood. This House believes Caribbean states should meaningfully limit migration to former colonial powers. I will do so presenting 2 points. The meaningful limits are a matter of economic self-interest and a necessary return on investments for Caribbean states, and that unregulated mass migration actively undermines national sovereignty and cripples long-term development. My second speaker will then touch on the threat of crippling brain drain, moral hazard, and complicity in neocolonial extraction. My third and final speaker will close our argument by summarizing our points and proving why we have won today's debate. Honorable adjudicators, my fellow opponents, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Before I proceed, allow me to define a specific term as it appears in the motion. To meaningfully limit, we do not mean a total permanent ban. We do not mean building walls or creating a police state. We mean sovereign, democratic, and proportionate measures designed to stop the hemorrhage of human capital. This could include requiring a period of national service after graduation, implementing an exit tax to recoup educational investments, or establishing bilateral agreements with receiving nations to manage migration flows. This is not a policy of it is a policy of sustainability, not a prison sentence. Honorable House, the Caribbean is not a factor producing goods for export, and yet through our current migration policies, we act as if it is. Our first point is simply economics. A nation that invests in its people must have the right to see a return on that investment. A 2019 report by the Inter-American Development Bank estimated that the Caribbean region loses on average 8.6% of its gross national product annually due to the immigration of tertiary educated citizens. For countries like Jamaica and Guyana, the loss is even higher. Consider this. The cost of educating a single doctor from primary school to medical school in the Caribbean is estimated to be over 200,000 USD. Between 2015 and 2020, it is estimated that over 4,000 Caribbean trained nurses and doctors migrated to the UK alone. I'm sure you can do the math to see that this represents nearly $1 billion in educational investments transferred from the Caribbean to the United Kingdom in less than a decade. That is $1 billion for free. What does this mean in practice? It means hospitals in Trinidad are understaffed for Trinidadian nurses fill wards in London. It means schools in Guyana are lacking qualified math teachers while Guyanese graduates teach in New York. It means the governments of these nations are forced to borrow money to build new infrastructure to replace the people they already paid to train. This is not an accident, this is a direct result of a policy that treats migration as a right but ignores the cost. Meaningful limits such as mandatory 2-year national service period for graduates of public universities or a progressive exit tax that recovers a portion of the state's investment are not punitive. They are a matter of economic justice. They ensure that the student who benefits from subsidized education first contributes to the society that made their education possible. This policy has precedent. Singapore, a nation that, like us, has no natural resources, implemented a system where students who accept the government scholarship must work in the country for a set number of years. If they leave early, they pay back the bond. As a result, Singapore has built one of the most resilient and prosperous economies in the world. Why is it prudent for Singapore but assumed to be authoritarian for the Caribbean? The right to leave was never intended to facilitate this kind of systematic exploitation. It is a perversion of liberty to suggest that the freedom to immigrate trumps the collective right of a nation to not be bankrupted by the process. Now, Mr. Speaker, my second point is about more than money. It is about the very soul of a nation. Unchecked mass migration creates a culture of dependency and exit rather than engagement. When the most ambitious, skilled, and politically engaged citizens can simply leave when things get too difficult, they are never incentivized to stay and fight for change. The result is a perpetual cycle of underdevelopment. Those who live on at a random cross-section of society, they are disproportionately the entrepreneurs, the innovators, the political activists, the professionals. They are precisely the people a developing nation needs to build strong institutions, to hold the government accountable, and to drive economic diversification. And when they leave, the nation is left with a vacuum. Civil society weakens, political accountability erodes because the most vocal citizens are no longer in the constituency. It becomes easier, not accepted at this moment. It becomes easier for corrupt or ineffective governments to remain in power because the class of people who would challenge them has immigrated. A state that cannot retain its talent cannot credibly plan for long-term development. How can a government commit to a 20-year infrastructure plan when it doesn't know if the engineer it trains today will be here tomorrow? How can a nation diversify its economy beyond tourism and agriculture when its best financial analysts and tech entrepreneurs are setting up businesses in Toronto and London? That uncertainty created by mass immigration makes long-term planning a fool's errand. It creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. A country is unstable and offers few opportunities. So people leave, which makes the country even more unstable and offer even fewer opportunities. To champion the individual's right to leave while ignoring the collective impact on sovereignty is not only intellectually unsound, but cruelty wrapped in a big red bow. Now let me reiterate that we are not proposing that you strap people and chain them to the land. We're proposing to break the cycle of extraction that has defined the Caribbean since colonialism. True sovereignty is not just the ability to control your borders, it is the ability to control your future. And you cannot control your future if you permanently board a plane to London. And yes, freedom of movement is important. We do not deny that it is a cornerstone of human liberty, but no right is absolute. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights also enshrines the right to an adequate standard of living, the right to health care, the right to self-determination. The right to live must be balanced against the right of a nation to survive and the right of citizens who remain to have functioning hospitals, to have functioning schools, to have functioning infrastructure. One person's right to live cannot be another's right to be abandoned. Mr. Speaker, this is about whether the Jamaican taxpayer, the single mother who pays her tax, the shopkeeper who contributes his earnings, should be forced to subsidize the British health care. What sense is freedom when a post-colonial metropole if they still benefit from the fruit of unpaid labor? We're proposing fair compensation, national service, and bilateral agreements, reasonable democratic measures that prioritize the survival of our nation. We're proposing a future where a Caribbean doctor can still choose to work abroad, but only after serving their community for a few years, or where the British government pays a fair market price for the talent it recruits. This is not authoritarianism, this is sovereignty. To conclude, Mr. Speaker, the status quo is not neutral. It is a system designed to benefit the former colonial powers at the expense of the Caribbean. The right to leave is a beautiful thing, but the right to stay, to thrive, and to build a future in the land of your birth is a right that has been denied to Caribbean people for centuries. It is time for that to change. We have the right to survive, and we will exercise it. The proposition versus momentarily.
Thank you very much, Madam Prime Minister. And just to caution all the debaters in this match, this is an international competition. There are different accents that pose a challenge to persons understanding you when you speak. And so the faster you speak, the more difficult that becomes. So I'm encouraging all speakers to speak slower and be a lot more deliberative in terms of ensuring that you are clear so that your opponents and the judges can follow you clearly. All right. Thank you very much, Madam Prime Minister. We now turn to CV Bethel Senior School to have them open the opposition's case. Hear, hear.
What does it truly mean to live in a free society if you are not free to live in it? Today's motion asks us to accept that limiting people's freedom will somehow improve their lives. But on closer inspection, we see that it does the exact opposite. Merriam-Webster defines meaningfully as a way that is serious or substantial. Additionally, limit means to confine within bounds, to place restriction on. Moreover, migration is defined as the act or instance of moving from one country, region, or place to another. Finally, colonial powers, also known as development countries, are sovereign states with advanced economies, high income, high standard of living, and strong infrastructure. Currently, Caribbean citizens migrate freely to former colonial powers such as the United Kingdom, France, and the Netherlands. This open system enables people to pursue education, work, and opportunities that may not exist locally, while also supporting their families and communities at home through remittances. Citizens are not systematically restricted by their governments, and migration remains a lifeline for millions, connecting personal advancement with the well-being of their home countries. This is why we urge the House to reject the motion of limiting migration to former colonial countries. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister claims that restricted migration will strengthen local economies, but there is no evidence that forcing citizens to stay actually improves their lives. This danger is not hypothetical. For decades, citizens of nearby Cuba were required to obtain official permission, even to leave their own country, and Cuban authorities routinely denied exit permits to thousands of people, including doctors, scientists, and professionals, forcing many to wait years or remain separated from their families despite having visas to enter other countries. Between 2003 and 2005, U.S. immigration officials received reports of over 1,700 Cubans being denied exit permits to leave Cuba, despite having visas elsewhere, a practice that violated basic freedom of movement and kept families apart and opportunities out of reach. Our first substantive focus is on economic survival. When a government begins to limit migration, it is no longer protecting its people, it is controlling them. 80% of migrants report that money is used to support the family's basic needs, such as food, housing, education, and healthcare, as remittances bring in billions of dollars annually into American Development Bank in 2024. Imagine this, Lourdes, a mother from Guatemala who made one of the hardest choices a parent can face. She left her children behind to work in the United States. Judges, restricting movement is not limiting travel. It is cutting off income, stability, and the very chance for a better life. But the danger does not stop here. Once the government decides who can and cannot leave, opportunity ceases to be a right and instead becomes a privilege granted to only a select few. However, the United Nations Human Rights Committee has affirmed that every person has the right to leave any country, including their own, and that illogical restrictions, especially those that benefit only the powerful, are a violation of human rights. Mr. Speaker, consider the story of Dr. Perez, a doctor from Cuba who won a U.S. visa in 2003, but in 2004, she was barred from leaving her country for 3 years. Her husband went ahead, unaware that he would be separated from his wife and child because her government would not allow her to leave. During that time, former President Castro accused the United States of actively luring large number of skilled professionals from Cuba, and he vowed that Cuba would not tolerate an exodus of professionals, declaring that country would not be exploited as an incubator of brains, and that those brains are primarily to serve our people. These real harms of separation, forced stagnation, and postponed futures are the consequences of policies that treat people as problems to be managed rather than human beings with aspiration of economic survival. Our second substantive is that migration is a form of repayment for the inherited flawed education system. Mr. Speaker, the CARICOM 10-point plan makes it clear European colonialism left the Caribbean communities in widespread illiteracy. Caribbean states inherited underdeveloped education systems. Yes, the CARICOM countries have worked hard to address the situation, but widespread functional illiteracy and weak education system still persist. The Prime Minister cannot claim to support the repair of historical exploitation while limiting the very freedom people use to overcome it. The reality is that for generations, Caribbean people were deliberately kept from advanced education. And even today, many countries still lack advanced education, the capacity to offer specialized training in fields such as medicine, engineering, and advanced sciences. So, when the Caribbean citizens migrate to countries like United Kingdom and Canada to study and train, they are not abandoning their countries. They're accessing the very opportunity that were historically withheld from them. That movement becomes part of the solution, not the problem. Judges, this reality is reflected in our own country. The Bahamian government offers the Public Service Scholarship, PSSP, which allows students to migrate to study in places like United Kingdom, Canada, and United States, because certain programs and opportunities simply are not available here or extremely limited. Even regionally, institutions like the University of the West Indies can admit only a limited number of students in competitive programs like medicine, leaving many qualified individuals without a place. As historian Hilary Bethel argues, reparatory justice requires us to recognize how past harm continues to shape present realities, not to reinforce the very barriers that keep people confined by them. Adjudicators, for the sake of our people, you cannot build a country, a stronger country, by locking its people in. Moderator.
We thank you very much. That was the leader of the opposition from CV Bethel Senior School. Ladies and gentlemen, we now move to the first segment of cross-examination. In this segment, the opposition team gets to ask 3 questions first of the proposition team, and thereafter we will flip to allow the proposition team to ask their 3 questions of the opposition team. Each of the questions is limited to 10 seconds, each response limited to 45 seconds. CV Bethel Senior School, you may ask your first question now.
Given that the CARECOM 10-point plan acknowledges the RAIN's inherited underdeveloped education systems, how does restricting migration improve those conditions?
All right, thank you for that question. The opposition seems to have misunderstood our entire case. We're not forcing people to stay in the country. That's not what we're doing. We're proposing advancing our policy so that people will be more likely to stay here by realizing that we have the more favorable options. So we're saying, instead of ignoring the problem of migration and acting like we're not having a deficit because of it, we should try to actually propose, implement new policies, implement new ideas so we can retain these people so that they won't even think to leave. We're not forcing anybody. We're trying to appeal to them.
You say you're trying to appeal to the people so that they stay. But should individuals be forced to sacrifice their opportunities for a system that's not supporting them?
All right, so the system that did not support them, I don't agree with that. Taxpayers right now, especially in Jamaica and other Caribbean states, they are supporting the education of multiple students. Example, my CAPE exams were paid by the taxes of the people. So do you think it would be fair for me to just leave and ignore Jamaica? I would think not, because they have supported me in so many areas. So yes, they have been supporting us and they will continue to support us. But given the fact, and they will continue to support us as well.
How exactly will your policy be enforced without violating rights or encouraging illegal migration?
Can you repeat the question?
How exactly will your policy be enforced without violating rights or encouraging illegal migration?
Okay, thank you for that question. The way how this policy would be enforced would be that it would not be a situation where the Prime Minister is the only person who has an option or a decision in this policy. So the Prime Minister, those who sit on the Parliament, the Governor General, the opposition party, and the people of that state would be involved in creating and putting their input into that policy. So that is how it would support them and it would encourage them to actually look and say, well, I believe this is what serves us better and I believe this is not. And that is how the decision that would be made to ensure that no one is being restricted or it would not force them.
Also, the policy isn't forcing anybody really and truly. It's just going to make them more likely to want to come. We're not forcing or putting a ban. Oh.
All right, thank you very much, CV Bethel, for those questions. Thanks to you, Montego Bay High School, for your responses. Montego Bay High School, you may now pose your questions to CV Bethel.
All right, the first question, you champion the right to freedom of movement, but does that right obligate Caribbean state to subsidize the healthcare system of former colonial powers by educating nurses and doctors who then leave immediately? Where is the justice in that?
Could you repeat your question, sorry? I didn't know what you said.
You champion the right to freedom of movement, but does that right obligate Caribbean state to subsidize the healthcare system and other system of former colonial powers by educating nurses and doctors who then leave immediately? Where is the justice in that?
Colonial powers don't just benefit from us, we benefit from them. Their systems, they're very advanced. So why shouldn't we go there and migrate and benefit to try to develop our underdeveloped economy?
It is about Caribbean citizens accessing opportunities. The CARICOM 10-point plan calls for educational and development support to address historical inequalities. Migration allows individuals to access the education and return its value.
This is why we firmly oppose the motion.
Your case seems to accept this neo-colonial extraction relationship as inevitable. By celebrating diaspora, aren't you essentially arguing that the Caribbean should accept its role as a labor reserve for the wealthy West?
Excuse me, can you say it slowly, please? I'm sorry.
Oh yes, sorry for that. So your case seems to accept the neo-colonial relationship as inevitable. By celebrating diaspora, aren't you essentially arguing that the Caribbean should accept his role as a labor reserve for the wealthy West?
So we can't understand anything you're saying on the back end of your question. The last couple words we can't understand.
All right, somebody else will read the
All right.
question.
Okay, I'm gonna read the question. So your case seems to accept the neo-colonial relationship, the neo-colonial extraction as inevitable. So by celebrating this, aren't you essentially arguing that the Caribbean should accept its role as a labor reserve for the wealthy West?
No, that's not what we're saying. We're saying that they shouldn't limit migration because of the benefits that it has. The remittance they send back to the country actually develops that country. So if you stop this, when you stop migration, you're stopping the development of the country and of the economy.
We support that the freedom of individuals to pursue the opportunity. The issue here is not about unlimited. It's about whether governments should restrict that freedom, and we believe they should not.
And this is why we firmly oppose this motion.
And it all comes down to brain circulation as well. You said in your speech about brain drain. It's not about brain drain, it's brain circulation and the money that we get back.
Finally, isn't your entire case a defense of the status quo? You offer no solution to brain drain, the hollowing out of the state, or the dependency culture. Aren't you simply telling Caribbean people to accept their fate as a labor exporting region?
Limiting migration treats the symptom, not the cause. Brain drain happens because of low wages and limited opportunities and underinvestments at home. It doesn't happen because of migration. Restricting movement violates individual freedom and does not guarantee people will stay productive locally. The World Bank shows that remittance makes up significant percent of the GDP. And in many Caribbean countries, in countries like Jamaica and Haiti, for example, remittance often extends to 10 to 20% of GDP, directly supporting families and local economies. So it's not brain drain, it's brain circulation. Migration actually supports development through money, skills, and networks.
Migration actually helps manage those effects through remittance and skill transfer. Speaker said, if we limit migration, we remove one of the few tools that people have to navigate those structural challenges.
All right, thank you very much to both teams for this exciting segment of cross-examination. We now invite the Deputy Prime Minister from Montego Bay High School to make her case on behalf of the proposition side. Hear.
Thank you. We'll start in 3, 2, 1. No problem can be solved by the same consciousness that caused it in the first place. The large surges of migration in the Caribbean were caused by economic, political, social, and environmental factors, including a lack of opportunities, natural disasters, and historical influences. Now, how does this relate? The mentality that caused these issues to worsen was rooted in helplessness and a lack of ambition. Then I asked the opposition, do you want to continue this shameful history? Why I asked, do you want our country to continue to be disadvantaged by something that can be fixed? Chairperson, adjudicators, members of the audience, and members of the opposition, good day. I stand proud with my team in strong agreement with the motion. This House believes Caribbean states should meaningfully limit immigration to former colonial powers. Now we propose this motion because there is simply no reality in which the migration of skilled individuals from Jamaica is positive. It is a strain and a failure to our country when these professionals continue to migrate and create a decline in our working population. Additionally, not taking away stimulate migration means that we as a country, as countries, are perfectly fine with being complicit in neo-colonial extraction. I'll be speaking on both of these points and also dismantling the opposition's arguments regarding remittances. Let me introduce my first point. The issue of brain drain. Brain drain is the loss of a country's educated and skilled workforce through migration, thereby reducing its capacity for economic growth and development. The Caribbean suffers greatly from brain drain and has one of the highest rates of tertiary educated immigration in the world. Nurses, teachers, doctors, and engineers live in droves for former colonial powers where they are actively recruited. Currently, over 70% of the Caribbean's educated population lives abroad, and in 2024 alone, the region lost over 378,000 people to migration. This is found in a study from the IMF, where they say average immigration has a negative and statistically significant impact on contemporaneous economic growth and change in labor force participation. These large numbers represent a massive subsidy from the Caribbean to wealthier nations, depriving the region of its human capital necessary for its own development, healthcare, and education system. So, with the stakes at hand, why does the opposition approach this motion as if this issue is just something we can ignore? We shouldn't find ways to limit migration. We shouldn't find ways to limit the theft of Caribbean skills to wealthy and much more developed nations. Is this what opposition wants to promote? Let us be frank. Migration to former colonial powers causes a severe and unsustainable brain drain in Caribbean states. Caribbean government invents heavily in educating professionals only for these individuals to actively be recruited by wealthier nations like UK and US. This creates a one-way transfer of human capital from developing states to developed ones. The opposition treats migration as a harmless individual choice. But in reality, it systematically removes the very people needed to build hospitals, educate the next generation, and sustain economic growth. The result is collapsing public services, understaffed hospitals, and weakened educational systems. Without skilled professionals, development becomes impossible. This locks Caribbean states into a cycle of dependency and underdevelopment. Therefore, if we do not meaningfully limit migration, we're actively choosing national stagnation. This is the result of ignoring migration. These are the results in not meaningfully limiting migration. Additionally, the opposition acts as if there are no court measures attempting to limit migration. Caribbean states are already intervening to limit migration in critical sectors. Currently, there are 40% vacancy rates in nursing, and governments have implemented retention policies to keep professionals in country. This proves two things. Migration is damaging enough to require intervention, and that limiting migration is already accepted as a necessary policy. Now, the opposition may argue that remittances offset the loss of people. However, remittances are a private transfer that does not build infrastructure, pay taxes, or create sustainable economic growth. Chairperson, when remittances make up 18 to 19% of GDP, such as in Jamaica and Haiti, this means economies are relying on people leaving to survive. That is not development. That is economic dependence on migration. And again, studies from the IMF show that economic losses from skilled migration actually outweigh any gains from remittances. The IMF found that when skilled workers leave, economic growth slows because countries lose productivity, innovation, and tax contribution. What they gathered is that remittances only supply individual households but not national development. How then can the opposition argue that this is in any way positive? Remittances create dependencies, inflate local economies, and do not compensate for the loss of skilled professionals who could have built industries and paid taxes for decades. To my next point, complicity in neo-colonial extraction. Unrestricted migration to former colonial powers perpetuates neo-colonial extraction of Caribbean resources. Historically, colonial powers extracted raw material and labor from the Caribbean. Today, that extraction has evolved. Our most valuable resource is our people. This is not a small issue. In some Caribbean states, over 7% of tertiary educated individuals live abroad. This is textbook systematic extraction. Wealthy nations recruit our best trained professionals without compensating the countries that funded their education. Additionally, you say our education system is weak, then how then are these wealthier countries recruiting our professionals? I thought education system was weak. This is textbook systematic extraction. This reinforces global inequality and keeps Caribbean nations structurally disadvantaged. Instead of building independent, self-sustaining economies, we remain exporters of talent to the very countries that once exploited us, the Caribbean. Limiting migration is therefore not just a simple policy, it is an act of economic sovereignty and historical justice. Chairperson, what this debate comes down to is very simple. Are we building our nations or are we exporting them? The opposition wants you to believe that this is about individual freedom, but this debate is about collective survival because when over half our educated population is gone, when your hospitals cannot function, when your economy depends on people leaving, there is nothing left to protect. Chairperson, we must ask ourselves, do we continue this cycle of loss or do we take control over our future? Do we obtain a new consciousness? For these reasons, I strongly urge you to stand with the proposition.
Okay, we thank you very much. That was the Deputy Prime Minister from Montego Bay High School. And we now call upon the Deputy Leader of the Opposition from CV Bethel Senior School. Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Prime Minister has argued that brain drain weakens the Caribbean, as many highly educated professionals leave for countries like the UK and Canada, causing the healthcare and education sectors to suffer. But I beg this House to see that migration does not solve this problem. People leave because of low wages, limited opportunities, and poor working conditions in their home countries. If Caribbean governments restrict migration, professionals will still want to leave, so they may migrate illegally or go to another destination. Instead of limiting migration, governments should improve salaries, invest in infrastructure, and create career opportunities. Countries like Canada and the United Kingdom attract workers because they offer better systems, not because Caribbean governments allow migration. So attempting to significantly limit people from exiting their country does not fix the reason they want to leave. Remittances significantly strengthen Caribbean economies. Mr. Speaker, our third fundamental point established that migration should not be limited because it provides major economic benefits through remittances. According to the Jamaican Observer in 2022, Haiti received $4.4 billion last year, representing 20% of the GDP, while Jamaica received $3.6 billion representing 24% of the GDP. These funds are used by families to pay for education, healthcare, housing, and small businesses. One migrant working abroad can financially support several family members at home, helping lift entire households out of poverty. This financial assistance can help stabilize Caribbean economies, especially during crisis. Take, for example, in the early 20th century, a large number of Bahamian men migrated to Florida to work on the Florida East Coast Railway. At that time, the Bahamian economy had stalled, and there were simply no jobs available at home. This organized labor migration indirectly generated government revenue through custom duties and consumption taxes. Judges, as you can see, these remittances not only impact individual families, but also the country at large. Limiting the number of people who can migrate to former colonial powers can significantly cut off a vital financial lifeline that supports both families and the government. Limiting migration would directly reduce a much-needed flow of foreign income into the region. Migration leads to skill development and brain circulation. Our fourth essential reason to not limit migration to former colonial powers is that it creates opportunities for skill development and knowledge transfer. The International Monetary Fund highlights that migrant communities contribute to investment in vocation and the sharing of expertise in their home countries. Many Caribbean migrants in former colonial states gain advanced education, technical training, and professional experience abroad. Mr. Speaker, this talent is not permanently lost, as many eventually return home, invest, mentor professionals, or collaborate with institutions in their home countries. This process often called brain circulation, strengthens the long-term development of Caribbean states. Moreover, research from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development explains that Caribbean migrant networks act as a vehicle for flow of knowledge and information to the countries of origin and help fluctuate in vacation, research, partnerships, and technology transfer. Even if the proposition only seeks to limit migration rather than completely stop it, the effect is still harmful. By restricting access to global education systems, professional training, and international labor markets, they reduce the number of Caribbean citizens who can gain these valuable skills and connections. Mr. Speaker, migration does not drain knowledge from the Caribbean, it circulates it. Skilled migrants build global networks that bring expertise, invocation, and investment back home. Limiting migration would weaken these knowledge flows and slow the region's long-term development. Migration strengthens global connections and opportunities. Mr. Speaker, another reason Caribbean states should not limit migration to former colonial powers is that migrations build global connections and opportunities to support long-term development. We already see how structured migration programs strengthen these global ties. For example, the Government of Canada established the Seasonal Agricultural Worker Program in partnership with Jamaica to allow seasonal agriculture workers to travel to Canada for temporary employment. Over the time, the program expanded to include other Caribbean countries and has operated for more than 50 years, bringing thousands of Caribbean workers to Canada each year. These workers gain income, international experience, and professional connections while supporting key sectors of the Canadian agricultural economy. At the same time, strengthening long-term relationships between Caribbean states and Canada. Members of the House, this demonstrates that migration is not simply about individuals leaving their countries. It creates lasting economic and diplomatic partnerships that benefit both sides. Limiting migration would weaken these networks, reduce opportunities for Caribbean workers, and isolate Caribbean states in an increasingly globalized world. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech, Deputy Leader of the Opposition. We move now into the second segment of cross-examination. In this segment, the proposition team gets to ask their questions first to the opposition team, then vice versa. The rules with respect to timings remain the same as that which would have obtained in the first segment of cross-examination. So Montego Bay High School, you're up first with your questions.
All right. You argue that migration is a symptom of state failure, but doesn't unrestricted migration make that state failure permanent by removing the very people who could have fixed it? How can you ever break the cycle if you refuse to address the root of the problem?
The root of the problem is not migration. The root of the problem is the underdevelopment inside the country. When they migrate, they come back and they bring these skills to develop the country. It's not migration. It's the country itself not being able to develop fully because of that colonial harm that was done. The illiteracy in the CARICOM's 10-point plan, they talk about how they affected our education systems and caused illiteracy worldwide.
An example, in the early 20th century, the Bahamian men migrated to Florida just to work because the Bahamian economy had stalled.
If we remove migration, those families lose that support, making existing struggling worse.
Migration has negatively impacted Caribbean countries via Brethren. You even mentioned the Bahamian to Florida state migration. However, it only benefited Florida. It did not benefit Bahamas itself. You even mentioned that the Canadian policy only supported Canada. Hence, how does this help the Caribbean? In all these instances, they only seem to benefit the country that they go to and not the Caribbean country themselves.
Sorry, could you repeat the question? I heard a lot of evidence. I heard a lot of talk. I didn't hear the question.
And can you slow down, please?
I'll repeat it, yes. So migration has negatively impacted the Caribbean countries via Brethren. You even mentioned that the Canadian policy you mentioned supported Canada. Even the migration of Bahamians to Florida only supported Florida. Hence, how does any of this help the Caribbean?
They supported the Caribbean by the money they sent back. When they go and they actually migrate to another place, the remittance, the 4.4, when Haiti received that $4.4 billion in remittance, it actually benefits them. And Jamaica actually received $3.6 billion in remittance. That is a large number of money to be sending back when you migrate.
In addition, many migrants return with skills and experience gained abroad. If we were to limit migration, we would cut off those financial flows and opportunities for skill development, which would weaken development rather than strengthen it.
Because keep in mind, the remittance makes up a significant percent of the GDP, 20% actually. So by limiting migration, we would actually be stopping this money inflow.
Thank
causing,
you. Thank you. All right, thank you very much. Next question, Montego Bay High School, and please do ask questions and not make statements.
Yes, sir. Sorry. So, if Caribbean education systems are supposedly weak, while your former colonial powers actively recruit our graduates, especially because a lot of them do not come back, doesn't that prove our states are producing valuable talent that should be protected rather than freely exported?
See, you can't say that they are producing talent that should be protected, but the states don't have enough, they're not developed enough to pay them what they need to pay. That's why they go and migrate so they can get the right amount. And actually, there has been programs to actually show that they do come back, like the program my second speaker mentioned with the agriculture in Jamaica, when they actually bring them on seasonal jobs so they can come back and provide for their families and their country to make it develop.
It's a support system. Institutions like Inter-American Development Bank show that remittances play a crucial role in sustaining households. If we remove migration, those households lose that support.
Thank you very much for that phase of cross-examination. We now move on to hear the questions from CV Bethel now.
Haiti has $4.4 billion annually in remittance. If we limit migration, how will you replace the billions of loss in remittance that families and economy depend on?
Issue itself is that we depend on remittances. Remittances do not impact or even positively impact our economy. They impact individual families. My family giving me $100 every month means nothing to the economy. All I do is use to buy my food and my different supplies. So therefore, the fact that we even depend on remittances shows how we need to, instead of just relying on remittances, we need to actually propose ways to limit migration. It is as national stagnation to think only remittances we must develop. 18 to 19% of remittances, and they do nothing essentially. We can't do that.
Can you provide a real-world example where restricting migration conditions?
I can actually. So for instance, let me find it. So yes, so across the Caribbean, countries like Saint Martin and Dominica have been able to reverse boundary by offering policies that emphasize financial incentive, housing support, and relocation assistance.
No. In our first question, for your answer, you stated that remittance doesn't benefit the economy. So you're telling me that the education systems, the small businesses, the hospitals, all of that doesn't benefit the economy?
Okay, so remittances happens when people overseas send money to their families. How is that impacting the economy? Yes, I can probably have little more money to send my child to school, but really and truly, will these people be able to impact the economy more if they were actually here working? Instead, they are using most of their money to support the economy overseas, because out of their pay, they're not going to use 80% of that and carry it back home. They're going to carry that to make that 80% stay overseas to support the overseas economy, not here. So therefore, even then, so remittances just simply wouldn't be the best option.
All right, so we thank the both teams actually for an exciting period of cross-examination. We'll now pause for 1 minute, after which we will hear the reply speakers' presentations, beginning with that from the opposition, concluding with that from the proposition. Teams, your 1 minute pause begins now. All right, debaters, we have just elapsed the 1 minute pause, and we're now ready to resume. And this time I call upon the third speaker, the reply speaker from the opposition team from CV Bethel Senior High School. Let us make that speaker welcome. Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, the motion asks Caribbean governments to meaningfully limit migration to former colonial powers. But what this really means, it's restricting how many people can go, work, and build their future. We, as the opposition, firmly reject this. Mr. Speaker, the government's major claim was that migration drains talent and wastes public investment in education. So limiting migration would protect Caribbean talent. Your first speaker of the proposition made the ludicrous claim that the government does not get back any return on their investment. And your second speaker said that migration causes brain drain. However, this claim collapses under scrutiny. Our team demonstrated that migration does not simply remove talent, it often creates what economics call brain circulation. Evidence from the International Monetary Fund show that migration networks frequently facilitate investments, knowledge transfer, and professional collaboration with home countries. Migrants gain skills abroad and return, invest, or mentor from overseas. The government assumed talents disappear permanently, but we prove that migration actually expands Caribbean human capital globally. Even if they only limit migration, they reduce access to the very education, training, and professional networks that allow Caribbean citizens to bring knowledge back home. Your second speaker tried to label our framework as neocolonialism and a systematic extraction. But there's no extraction. The people choose to go and get paid and benefit from this migration. According to data reported by World Bank and regional reportings, countries like Haiti receive about $4.4 billion from remittance, while Jamaica receives $3.6 billion annually. These funds support education, healthcare, housing, and small businesses. Your second speaker stated that the remittance does not benefit the economy. But how does this not benefit the economy? More importantly, when these funds circulate through the economy, governments collect taxes and foreign exchange increases. The government never provided an alternative economic strategy that could replace these billions in financial inflows. Their policy does not strengthen Caribbean economies. It simply removes a vital financial lifeline. Mr. Speaker, the government suggested that limiting migration would increase development within Caribbean states. But this claim was never proven. Restricting movement does not magically create industries, jobs, or investments. Our team showed that migration actually strengthens development through international partnerships and economic ties. Programs such as the Seasonal Agricultural Worker Program, established by Canada in partnership with Jamaica, demonstrate how structured migration builds long-term economic relationships while providing income and skills for Caribbean workers. Limiting migration would weaken these partnerships and isolate Caribbean states in a global economy where small nations rely heavily on international connections. Members of the House, the second speaker of the proposition also argued that migration to former colonial powers represents exploitation. Yet, their solution directly contradicts their concern. If colonial history created inequalities, restricting migration simply closes off one of the few pathways Caribbean citizens have to access education, wealth, and opportunity in those same economies. Our team showed that mobility can function as a form of practical reparatory justice, aligned with the goals of the CARICOM 10-point plan for reparatory justice. The government claims to fight historical injustice, yet their policy prevents Caribbean citizens from accessing opportunities, which is another pathway to reparatory justice that helps overcome that legacy. Your first speaker made the claim that countries steal professionals, but they do not steal. Individuals decide to migrate to support opportunities and jobs. Mr. Speaker, the government argued that former colonial powers actively recruit Caribbean professionals. But again, their solution targets the wrong problem. Members of the House, the government asks us to trust that the state should decide when and where its citizens may live in order to protect national interests. But history shows us the danger of giving the government that kind of power. When countries claim they must restrict migration to stop talent from being taken away by wealthier nations, the result is not protection, it is control. We already saw this with Fidel Castro reacted to the migration of skilled professionals to the United States by restricting the ability of doctors and other professionals to leave the country. It did not create national progress. It was a separation of families, and it created the denial of personal freedom for ordinary citizens. Members of the House, the government's entire case rests on one flawed assumption that limiting migration solves the problem they describe. But the opposition has proven that restricting migration does not create development, does not recover talent, and does not strengthen families. For those reasons, this House must firmly reject the motion.
Thank you very much, Opposition Reply Speaker. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let us make welcome the Proposition Reply Speaker. Hear, hear. Team Proposition, you may now deliver your reply speech.
I will begin in 3, 2, 1. Mr. Speaker, honorable adjudicators, members of the House. As mentioned by my first speaker, when we say to meaningfully limit, we do not mean a total permanent ban. We do not mean building walls or creating a police state. We mean sovereign, democratic, and proportionate measures designed to stop the hemorrhage of human capital. Let us be very clear from the outset. This debate was never about whether Caribbean people should have the freedom to move, but rather about whether Caribbean states should be forced to fund their own development and then applaud it as freedom, because that is a contradiction at the heart of the opposition's case. They want you to believe that a country should educate its people, train its professionals, invest in its future, and then have absolutely no claim to that investment the moment those individuals decide to leave. Mr. Speaker, that is not freedom. That is a one-way transaction. That is extraction. So the clash in this debate is simple. Who should benefit from Caribbean investment? The Caribbean people who funded it, or the former colonial powers who receive it for free? Because every single argument from the opposition tries to avoid answering that question. Now let me deal directly with their strongest point: freedom of movement. They will sit here and say, people have the right to leave. And yes, we agree. Of course they have the right to leave. But what they fail to prove is that the right to leave also includes the right to take publicly funded benefits with zero obligation. Because we limit that freedom all the time. You cannot take a government scholarship and ignore the bond attached to it. You cannot break contracts and walk away without consequences. And you most certainly cannot benefit from public systems and pretend you owe nothing back. So why suddenly, when it comes to migration, do they want absolute freedom? Mr. Speaker, they're not defending freedom. They're defending irresponsibility. You cannot take public money and call it private freedom. And let me push this further, because the opposition wants to frame our side as extreme. The opposition has continued to misunderstand this motion as a proposal of total authoritarianism run by a supreme leader. They say we are restricting people, controlling movement, being authoritarian. But what are we actually proposing, Mr. Speaker? Temporary national service, exit taxes, bilateral agreements, not bans, not borders being locked shut, not people being trapped. So let me ask the opposition this. If asking someone to give back a few years or repay what they took is oppression, then what do you call taking everything and giving nothing? Now let us dismantle their safety net: remittances. Mr. Speaker, remittances are defined as money sent by people working abroad back to individuals in their home country, usually to support family members. The opposition continuously mentions that many migrants send back remittances and that they often return with reference to the agricultural program. However, both these instances are individual and have no direct effect on the Caribbean state itself. How is this in any way justifiable? They will tell you that migration is beneficial because money comes back home. But let us be honest about what remittances are. They are private transfers. They go to households, not governments. They help individuals survive, but they do not help countries develop. In the instance of remittances, this person is sending money back to their families, not the Jamaican government. If I had permanently migrated to the US as a citizen, I now hold a US visa. I am not paying taxes or any real impactful funds to Jamaica. I am sending money to my family. So once again, What impact does this have on the Jamaican economy? The opposition has failed to clarify. They do not build hospitals. They do not train new doctors. They do not fix failing school systems. So when they sit here and celebrate remittances, what they're actually saying is, we are okay with exporting our workforce as long as we get pocket money in return. Mr. Speaker, you cannot replace a doctor with a money transfer. You cannot staff a hospital with remittances. And you most certainly cannot build a nation on Western Union receipts. And when remittances become a major part of GDP, that is not success. That is dependency. That is an economy built on absence. Now they have tried one last escape, Mr. Speaker. They will come back. But where is the guarantee? Where is the policy? Where is the mechanism that ensures return? There is none. And while they wait on hope, hospitals remain understaffed, schools remain under-resourced, and development remains stalled. Mr. Speaker, you cannot plan a country's future on a maybe. Now let us compare both sides clearly. On our side, we acknowledge the problem and we offer solutions, structured, reasonable, and enforceable policies to retain talent and ensure return on investment. On their side, nothing. No mechanism to stop brain drain. No plan to rebuild institutions. No strategy for long-term growth. They accept the loss and rebrand it as liberty. So when we weigh this debate, we must ask, what carries greater value? On their side, unrestricted individual movement and short-term financial flows. On our side, functional healthcare system, strong education system.
Okay,
Fellow
thank you,
adjudicator,
Speaker.
ask yourself.
You are out of time. Apologies about that. Thank you to all the debaters in this match. Thanks to you for your excellent argumentation and contestation of this motion. We, as the adjudicators, will now leave to deliberate and will return shortly with the results. Stay tuned.
Now, I strongly withhold the stance that reparations are needed today because of the long-lasting social, economic, and psychological effects of slavery, colonialism, and systematic depression still impacting communities.
These long-term effects have created unequal access to wealth, health, education, and opportunity.
Reparations aim to address these lasting harms and promote genuine equality and justice.
My name is Shantae Lawrence.
My name is Renee Shaw.
My name is Khadija Jennings.
And we're here representing
the Montego High School for Girls in the 2026 International Reparations Debate.
Good afternoon, TV Bethel Debate Club. Today's special is reparations. Why? Because true equality is impossible without accountability. Because what was taken must be restored. Because justice delayed is justice denied. Because time does not substitute for what's owed. Because we still face the effects of slavery every day. Because we want to bring justice to the table.
The Center for Reparation Research is thrilled to launch this International Reparation Debate Competition. This International Reparation Debate Competition that we launched today for secondary schools is one of our most important projects. How do we engage youth on matters of reparatory justice? The change needed in the education system can only be advanced when the youth are engaged and their voices are heard.
Why is reparations so important in and for the Caribbean? Because time comes for justice for our ancestors. Time comes for the Caribbean to insist on the right to development, to be compensated for the violence against our ancestors. So outreach to the young people who have joined this movement is critical.
There is no mass movement that isn't a youth movement. And we certainly want reparations to be a mass movement. So it's really exciting, though, to have a regional stroke international debating competition. And I'm looking forward to your participation as you construct your arguments for and against, remembering that the 10-point plan for reparatory justice is our guiding framework for the areas in which we are demanding compensation, because we certainly want to impact the public opinion and awareness in Europe. So it's fantastic to have the United Kingdom participating as well.
So why is it important for youth to be involved in the reparation movement? Being involved in the reparations movement is critical to youth if one is to know their history so that they can understand why their societies are functioning as they are today. The future of the countries we live in are dependent on the current situation that exists today in our countries. And these current conditions were created by the past, including indigenous genocide, African enslavement, indentureship, and colonization. Being involved in reparations is about seeking justice, seeking a way to reduce inequalities in our own countries and then in the broader world. It's about seeking a more peaceful and balanced world, where global problems are solved in partnerships, not in isolation. I believe the sponsors are hoping this competition will allow our youth to gain knowledge about the past so that as young people, you'll be able to make better decisions in the future and make our countries better places.
We know that we need to understand stories about people that look like us. So the fact that so many of you young people have registered was so encouraged by your enthusiasm and your passion for wanting to enter this debate. It is so important. It's just at the core of who we are, that we need to understand where we come from, understand our true history, and having a debate competition on this particular topic is such an important milestone, to have a real conversation about repair. And the fact that our young people were so articulate with their presentations, and to ensure that we keep educating our young people, because you are the future of us and are the Caribbean's a sustainable future. So congratulations, everybody.
We are looking forward to the debate. Encourage everyone to join the debate. Thank you so much, all.
Education about the history of the oppression of a people can either be a tool for liberation or a tool for reinforcing trauma. What allows for education to be one or the other is not the topics taught, but how they are delivered. Therefore, we, the proposition, would like to firmly state that teaching the history of the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans, or TTEA for short, does significantly more harm than good, not because of the topic, but because of the current pedagogical approach taken. Your average high schooler learns about the transatlantic trafficking in enslaved Africans through a rigid, standardized curriculum. They are taught by a teacher who is expected to simply deliver information, often in a lecture format, and test students on their ability to memorize facts, years, and names. In this setting, students are not invited to engage critically with the material, ask difficult questions, or relate the content to their own lived experiences. Instead, they passively receive a version of history unable to truly process its relevance, impact, or emotional weight. Where is the opportunity to understand how this horror shaped the blood in our veins and the names we carry? There is none. Students memorize facts and regurgitate them on paper. But inside, the lesson lingers, that the history of the African diaspora is one of subjugation, and that their place in the world is to suffer and survive, not to lead, not to thrive. This is exactly what Paulo Freire, in his work The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, described as the banking method of education, where students are treated as empty accounts to be filled by the teacher. Freire believed this model was fundamentally oppressive because it prevents learners from becoming active participants in their own liberation. It discourages dialogue, reflection, and consciousness raising. This is what he calls conscientization. The teaching of the transatlantic trafficking in enslaved Africans today in many classrooms still follows this harmful pattern. When this topic is taught in a banking method that assumes dichotomy between human beings and the world they live in, Freire says an individual is a spectator rather than a recreator. This kind of teaching doesn't empower, it conditions students to fit into a world shaped by oppression rather than resist it. And that is why we say it does more harm than good, because it teaches history in a way that keeps students passive, not engaged. We learn about Oladoye Equiano, we learn his name, we learn that he experienced this and he wrote an account, but do we open the book and study it and analyze it and discuss it with our teachers the way that Israeli schools discuss Elie Wiesel's Night of the Holocaust? The opposition says they want students to learn about the slave trade and the enslavement of a people. And of course, we all want all students
across the world to have reverence for this grave and absolutely horrific period of history. And we do this with the intention that learning about it can empower them to challenge the lingering legacies of racism and inequality. However, defending the status quo, which our opposition seeks to uphold and claims offers us more good than harm, will not offer us this. This is not remembrance. This is not reverence. And when you trace this system back to its roots, you realize that this is not our system at all. Accepted.
The fact that students today are not just learning about the brutality, but also about the resistance, the rich civilizations before slavery, and the ongoing legacies, creating empowerment more than harm.
Right. Our issue is not with these topics being taught, but it is the way that they are taught and the way that they are emphasized with regards to all of the other things that are occurring within African history. To continue, our education system was inherited from Britain, a colonial power that had no interest in nurturing Caribbean identity or liberation. And what good can we expect from teaching this topic when we are continuing to do so in England's pedagogical approach? Even worse, as you mentioned, African history is taught in the Americas and Europe as though it began with slavery. From primary school, students are introduced to African people not through the glory of their kingdoms, their intellectual traditions, or their achievements, but through their chains. Why is it so hard for you to name a single black figure whose legacy is not defined by resistance or white oppression? Why is it that we teach about Toussaint and Nani but not Imhotep, Mansa Musa, or Queen Nzinga in the same breath? This should be taught first. And compare this to how the Holocaust is taught in Israeli. This is taken from the Israeli Ministry of Education.
Point of information.
Declined. Children are introduced to the brilliance of their culture first, their thinkers, their faith, and their resilience before they are taught about genocide. Their oppression is contextualized within a legacy of strength, not as the first chapter. If that isn't a pedagogical problem, then what is? When slavery is taught primarily as a story of powerlessness and victimization, with the current banking method of pedagogy, it does more than inform. It deeply affects the psychological development of students, particularly those of the African diaspora. During adolescence, a critical time for identity formation, as described in Erikson's theory of psychosocial development, students are particularly vulnerable to internalizing messages about their race and their place in history. If the dominant narratives they encounter emphasize subjugation or this constant need to fight without also highlighting pre-colonial civilizations and agency, students may inherit a sense of trauma and inferiority. Claude Steele and Joshua Aronson's 1995 concept of stereotype threat shows that students underperform when they fear confirming negative stereotypes about their group, a common experience for Black students navigating a curriculum saturated with ancestral suffering. In classrooms where Black students only encounter these narratives and are rarely offered examples of greatness before colonial times, they are more likely to fear confirming negative stereotypes about Black intellectual inferiority. And yes, this study found that this did significantly reduce their academic performance. In contrast, we argue for emancipatory pedagogy, which views students as active co-creators of knowledge and encourages reflection, dialogue, and transformation. We want students to read and discuss the first accounts, and this should be a mandatory part of the curriculum, not an option. Additionally, students should be first met with pre-colonial history that showcases the richness and strength of Africans from various tribes and kingdoms before delving into the horrors of the slave trade. Through student-centered dialogic approaches, this topic becomes not a detached narrative of victimhood, but a pathway to critical consciousness where students develop an internal locus of control, a sense of pride, and the tools to challenge injustice. When classrooms prioritize empathy, voice, and critical inquiry over memorization, the teaching of the TTEA can become what Freire calls a practice of freedom, not oppression. We are fully justified in arguing that teaching the history of the TTEA causes more harm than good on the basis of the heavily flawed pedagogy. In parliamentary debate, motions like this are evaluated based on the status quo, meaning how things are actually occurring now. As such, the opposition cannot shift the debate by suggesting that in some ideal future it could be taught differently or argue on the basis of the principle. We are debating the present, and the burden is to defend the way that it is taught now. Thank you.
All protocols observed, the opposition remains resolute against the motion. This House believes that the teaching of the trafficking of enslaved Africans causes more harm than good. We in the opposition agree that there are flaws in the method, but we argue that even in its current form, teaching this history does far more good than harm. We accept the definitions posited by the opposition with the exception of the word harm. Harm caused by the teaching of the trafficking of enslaved Africans in this case is more like temporary discomfort that fosters long-term justice awareness and healing. The proposition burden is to prove that the act of teaching this history is inherently harmful, even when taught well, and that these harms are so deep and widespread that they outweigh all educational and social benefits. We must prove that the current approach generates more harm than good, and 2, the harm is not inherent to the method but as a result of poor implementation, and 3, that the teaching of enslaved Africans creates civic awareness, empathy, prevention of recurrence, and general social progress. The status quo. The history of the transatlantic trafficking in enslaved Africans is already being taught, but with growing care and impact. Students today are learning not just about the brutality, but also the resistance, the rich civilizations before slavery, and the ongoing legacies of inequality. Yes, some schools get it wrong. Reform is being done for more inclusive, trauma-informed, and empowering education, making it the norm. Mr. Speaker, we are not for the current way of teaching this history. The motion didn't state the current way. We are for the best way of teaching this history. Allow me to rebut. And this best way is trauma-informed teaching. This would be training teachers to handle emotional topics with care, no graphic reenactments, use check-ins, and create safe spaces. This builds resilience instead of re-traumatizing students. And 2, balancing the story. Don't stop at brutality. Teach about African civilization, resistance leaders like Nani of the Maroons, and achievements of the African diaspora that restores pride and identity. 3, we would center real voices, use first-hand accounts, African scholars, and cultural sources to humanize the content and shift away from cold textbook trauma, and link the past to the present, which will let students reflect through debates which are already being done, and modern connections to racism and justice. This transforms discomfort into action and purpose, including Black educators. Involve Black voices in teaching is as authenticity, prevents tone deafness, and build trust in diverse classroom. This is credible as the RAN program has a similar approach, and it has proven to be working, as it has a 94% increase in the racial unity and empowerment. Allow me to rebut the misconceptions provided by the government. The government stated that teaching of trafficking of enslaved African causes discomfort and psychological harm. But let me say that discomfort is not harm, Mr. Speaker. And the 2019 UNESCO states that students taught slavery alongside resistance have greater empathy and understanding of justice. And secondly, discomfort is necessary for growth and historical reckoning, just like the Holocaust education or genocide studies. They also stated that the current method does not include the history before slavery. But Mr. Speaker, let me say that this is a big misconception. Most syllabi incorporates the history of the Africans before they were colonized. We don't learn about slavery before we learn about Mansa Musa. We don't learn about slavery before we learn about Songhai Empire. It is in the rationale also
Points of information
that the teachers should use discussions to actually engage the students. In today's debate, I will bring 2 substantive. 1, the current methods build civic awareness, empathy, and critical thinking. And 2, discomfort from learning is not the same as harm. It leads to empowerment. My second speaker will discuss justice and the prevention of repetition in the injustice, while my third speaker will prove why we remain supreme. Our first substantive is the harm lies in the method, not the content. My first warrant is balanced teaching that includes stories of resistance and survival, reduces emotional harm, and builds empathy. When we emphasize both suffering and human dignity in the trafficking of enslaved Africans by teaching resistance, African agency, and survival, we shift from trauma to empowerment. It does more harm than good because it builds pride, resilience, and understanding. For example, the Holocaust education isn't taught by showing only images of death camps. They come with stories of resistance, survival, and moral courage. It fosters pride, empathy, and moral courage instead of guilt or division. That's why balanced, trauma-informed teaching benefits are supreme. My second warrant is effective, safe teaching already exists and work. We're seeing programs like Facing History and Ourselves offer concrete evidence that teaching hard history can be both emotionally and safe, intellectually enriching. According to a 2021 RAN Corporation study, students in these programs, which is a reform program by the way, show that 94% increase in civic agency agency, meaning they felt more empowered to take social action and reported deeper empathy, stronger historical understanding, and more open-minded attitude. And the fact that we're seeing this in real classroom, Mr. Speaker, proves that harm is not inherent to the topic. It's about how we design the curriculum and support teachers. And we are currently doing this now to reform. If we have models that work, and we do, then the moral burden shifts to improving delivery, not erasing the content. What my third warrant is suppressing this history causes more harm than good. Mr. Speaker, be aware that we're not talking just about the current history. We're talking about the teaching of the history overall, because that's what the mood says. In environments where slavery is ignored or downplayed, misinformation spreads like wildfire. Students grow up believing that slavery was minor, that racism is just a mere relic of the past, or that systemic inequality is simply an overreaction. This ignorance sustains real-world harm, and contrary to this, we're seeing that countries like Germany, who have faced their history head-on with regards to the Holocaust, show lower levels of historical denialism and far-right extremism than those that whitewash. The impact, it promotes social equity and activism, because when students learn this history accurately and empathetically, they become more socially aware, engaged, and ready to challenge injustice. And 2, it empowers empathetic, informed citizens who are empowered to fight modern injustice. And 3, it protects future generations from repeating injustice itself. My second substantive is silence enables racism to thrive. My first warrant is when schools avoid teaching slavery, they leave students with distorted or incomplete narratives. In the absence of formal education, when students are left to piece together understanding from biased media, peer opinions, or online misinformation, the result is a deeply distorted view of race and history. A 2018 SPLC report showed that only 8% of the US high school seniors could identify slavery as the primary cause of the Civil War. When students believe that slavery was a voluntary arrangement or that racism ended in 1865, it undermines every effort to promote justice and equality today. Silence gives racism plausible deniability that it suggests falsely that if we don't talk about injustice, it must not exist. The impact, it ensures future generations. And with that, the proposition momentarily rests.
400 years ago, 400 years ago, my people were dragged from their homes, tribes, families, placed on floating wood, and shipped across the Atlantic to what will be later described as the most inhumane act of all time. Cold, dark, uncomfortable, cannot describe the trip in ships where whips did not fail to miss. Injustice, rape and disgrace, blood rains, brute, force, ignorance, hate in their veins. Sweat and tears, labor revealed, produce from king fields only for the esteemed. 400 years of eroding one's pride, culture, heritage, value. 400 years of the iron chain, stringing up, leaving bare. Oh, but they never cared. Why fight when you would be met with sharp blades? So don't you dare cry out in fear. Why not plan escape with the plaiting of one's hair? Oh, the drums, listen, dance, communicate. For tonight we fight a battle not even death could spare. Blue eyes, white skin, master said that's beauty within. But guess what? Black, brown, gold, royalty, reparations we are owed. Them say hassa, but we say cassava. That's where we get the strength from to beat and conquer. For tonight we're returning to Ghana. You may say, I'm a descendant of slaves because of the rich melanin that gushes from my pores. But I came to tell you tonight, I am not a slave, rather the descendant of kings and queens. I am the embodiment of the divine. I do not chase, I align, I attract. What's meant for me already has my name on it. I am the personification of beauty, the expression of love, the creator of life, the acknowledgement of freedom. So go ahead, call me what you want, because when I die, bury me in the oceans where my ancestors jumped from the ships, because they knew death was better than bondage.
This is something that I wanted to discuss since Emancipation Day, but did you know that Britain only finished paying for slavery in 2015? Yes, 2015 as in 10 years ago. This fact was revealed in a since-deleted tweet back on February 9, 2018 by the then Her Majesty's Treasury. In 1833, Britain borrowed 40% of its national budget, £20 million, to finance the Slavery Abolition Act. This act was the official end of British slavery and went into effect on August 1, 1834. The money that was borrowed was used to repay British slave masters for their quote-unquote loss of property. However, for the enslaved, there was no repayment and no form of compensation was offered. The amount that was borrowed, the £20 million, was equal to £2.2 billion in today's money. The since deleted tweet from Her Majesty's Treasury pointed out that the taxes paid by people today was used to repay the loan that paid the slave masters. This would mean that people from the Windrush generation and their descendants, people from Barbados, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and other British colonies, would have helped to repay the loan taken out to pay the people who enslaved their ancestors. Using this video, I want to highlight that when people say that slavery was so long ago, 400 years ago, ancient history, and we should get over it, we can see that it wasn't that long ago. If we look at a timeline of the history of Barbados, we can see that chattel slavery in Barbados lasted 207 years, whereas the time from emancipation in 1834 to today is only 191 years.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are at the end of an exhilarating contest between two very, very good teams. We had onside proposition, Montego Bay High School out of Jamaica, and onside opposition, CV Bethel Senior High School out of the Bahamas. They were contesting the question, the debate, the motion as to whether or not we should set restrictions on Caribbeaners migrating to former colonial states or powers. And of course, the proposition team being in favor of this contends that the Caribbean is suffering brain drain. And were it not to be exporting or losing its citizenry to the extent that it is, those citizens could stay behind and help in the development of these Caribbean states. They say, for instance, that in as much as the Caribbean governments with its limited resources have invested in its human capital to train and upskill them, and then to lose that investment overseas, it is bad. They speak about a sort of a moral obligation for those who would have received the benefits of the investment to stay back, to be held back, and to ultimately contribute to the development of those societies. And they dispute offhand the contestation from CV Bethel that there is a significant revenue to be earned and through remittances, and that those remittances help in the development of the Caribbean states nevertheless. CV Bethel, by the way, contends that those remittances are necessary, and without the access to these foreign countries, the economies of the Caribbean would stall. It's at that point that an interesting and intriguing question arises. Montego Bay High School's contention that the human development is needed through accessing capable, qualified human resources to build the economy, and that is what the Caribbean has invested in by and large. We feel that it is intuitive that there is going to be some development. We think that though that to make it even more compelling, that idea, it would have been helpful that Montego Bay High School explain to us how development occurs, how almost organically or mechanistically people resident within the Caribbean would have ultimately developed those Caribbean islands and states more than they are already developed. Insofar as CV Bethel contends that there is broad-based destitution and economic deprivation, and it's in that context that people must leave, not seeming to buy into the narrative from Montego Bay High School that if they were to stay, then we'd get that kind of dividends and development flowing ultimately. We also get, though, from CV Bethel some two major contentions. One, the idea of the access to sort of improved capacities through skill sharing and skill acquisition overseas. And secondly, that, and this is hinged now on the reparations discussion, that insofar as these developed countries, former colonial powers, have the resources, have the capacities that they've ripped from the Caribbean through the period of enslavement, that ultimately providing access to Caribbean people to get those resources and those access is important insofar as reparations does not seem to be likely to occur, or the likelihood of reparations does not seem to be that great. And so it is, they say justice demands that access be provided to these resources so that more of those resources could flow to the Caribbean. We feel that it is a reasonable supposition that intellectual capacity has been built up, may very well lead to some amount of development within the Caribbean. What we're uncertain of is what is the comparative and how to weigh that particular contention. We're uncertain as to whether or not keeping Caribbean people here is going to lead to a flourishing of Caribbean economies and societies, or if sending people overseas who are already trained to get more training, get more capacities, and bring it back to the Caribbean is going to lead to greater benefits. We're not understanding as well as a panel of adjudicators what exactly is going to be the net impact from either approaches. So we feel like we want to encourage the teams that, you had another chance with this debate, it would have been helpful had you sort of spent more time to kind of explain that to us. That said, we think that CV Bethel makes the idea of remittance fairly impactful, contending that major aspects of Caribbean societies constitute the GDPs of Caribbean societies are comprised significantly. I think it was 20% in one instance, comprised of remittances. So that is an objective truth, we contend. We feel like there's no reason to dispute that. We don't hear the proposition of disputing that, or we needed to have, though, that place in context. What would be the likely impact on Caribbean societies if we do not have this remittance flowing? And furthermore, we contend that insofar as the debate speaks to reducing or restricting the flows of Caribbean peoples to former colonial powers, insofar as the average intelligent voter knows that the major places to which Caribbean peoples go are the United States and Canada, and then maybe thirdly Britain, that Britain constitutes a smaller share of the population of Caribbean immigrants relative to that which exists in the United States and in Canada. We're unsure as to whether or not we would actually get those gains that Montego Bay High contends we will get. Now, another point of note is we needed to understand, beyond the broad statement coming to us from CV Bethel, that there is going to be the acquisition of new skills and new competences and new training. One, what is the utility of that, broadly speaking, within the Caribbean? Is it that the Caribbean has a deficit so significant to make that a compelling outcome? Or is it, and furthermore, to what extent is the Caribbean being developed from these skills? So we think that it's a plausible idea coming from CV Bethel. We're uncertain as to whether or not that is being materialized in the real world. We think, though, again, and I'm being very painstaking in this explanation here, we feel like even though not sufficiently mechanized to make it absolutely true, or more certain than not, we feel like it is intuitive that Caribbean people trained in the Caribbean and forced or made and it made more difficult for them to leave, would likely apply their training towards aspects of the development of the Caribbean societies. We doubt very much that Caribbean peoples who are trained, given their higher levels of education, would sit by and simply wilt in the oppressive context that they find themselves in. Okay? Again, the extent to which that will happen, we are uncertain. So a lot of uncertainties in this match and the end of it all. And the scores do reflect, relative to the previous two matches that went ahead in this quarterfinals round, that a bit more work and a bit more clearer explanation would have, in fact, been quite helpful. The scores are as follows. Very, very close between the two teams. 273 to 271. 2 points separating the two teams. Ladies and gentlemen, this reflects a split on the panel. Two of the judges voted in favor of the team that ultimately prevails and advances to the semifinals. And one, that being the chair myself, voted for the other team, the team that does not unfortunately advance. The winners of this match in the quarterfinal round, third match of the the international reparations debate competition is, ladies and gentlemen, Montego Bay High School. Congratulations, Montego Bay High School, on the victory, and very well tried, CV Bethel senior school.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you so much. My comments, I just want to say congratulations for making it so far, because this match would have meant that you qualified as the Elite Eight, and that is a feat in its own. So congratulations for that itself. And also the scores were very close. So it clearly showed that we all were well educated on the topic. We all did our researches, and it also showed in the speeches and the answers to the questions. So once again, congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you.
And you.
Thank you.
So congenial, both teams are one towards the other. Ladies and gentlemen, before I announce the best debater, I just want to leave with a strong caution. Montego Bay High School, the pace with which you're speaking was a lot challenging, not a little, a lot challenging for CV Bethel to understand and to engage in a meaningful discourse with you. You made it unnecessarily difficult. Please bear in mind that you are a Jamaican, but you have an accent, and your accent is not as familiar to other persons from other islands and other parts of the world. So be mindful of that. Try to speak slower, even at the expense of the content of your speech. All right? So, ladies and gentlemen, the best debater in this match comes to us from the winning team. And again, there was a split on that decision. The best debater is the third speaker, the reply speaker from Montego Bay High School. I think it is worth noting as well that the commendable debater who earned the vote of at least one judge, myself as chair, is in fact the third speaker from CV Bethel Senior High School. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for tuning into this debate. We have one more match to go before we conclude the quarterfinals round in the International Reparations Debate Competition for 2026. Please do join us in a few minutes from now for that final match.